There is a disturbing moment that eventually arrives in almost every life. You look around and realize that although the years have changed, something inside your life has remained exactly the same. Different people, same disappointment, different opportunity, same hesitation, different relationship, same ending, different year, same fear. At first, you call it coincidence, bad luck, timing. Perhaps you blame the people around you. Perhaps you promise yourself that next time will be different. And sometimes, for a while, it is. You change jobs, change relationships, change cities, change routines, change goals. You remove everything that appears to be causing the problem. And then, months later, years later, you suddenly recognize the same feeling. The scenery changed. The pattern didn't. Carl Jung spent much of his life studying precisely this mystery. Why do human beings repeat experiences they consciously claim they no longer want? Why does someone who desperately wants love repeatedly choose people who cannot love them? Why does someone who dreams of success sabotage themselves whenever success becomes possible? Why does someone who hates conflict repeatedly find themselves surrounded by it? Why do we promise ourselves, never again, only to discover ourselves standing inside another version of the same story? Jung believed the answer begins with an uncomfortable truth. The conscious mind is not the only force directing your life. Beneath the identity you recognize, there exists an enormous psychological world. Memories, complexes, fears, symbols, unresolved emotions, inherited patterns, forgotten experiences, parts of yourself you rejected so long ago. You no longer remember rejecting them. Together, they form the unconscious. And the unconscious does not simply sit quietly beneath awareness. It participates. It influences what attracts you, what frightens you, what you avoid, what you tolerate, what you repeatedly choose. Sometimes, even what you believe is possible for you. Imagine walking through a forest at night. You carry a small lantern. Everything illuminated by the lantern represents what you consciously know about yourself. Your name, your history, your plans, your beliefs, your personality. But beyond that circle of light, the forest continues. Miles and miles of darkness, trees you cannot see, paths you do not know exist, animals moving beyond your awareness. Your conscious mind sees the lantern and assumes it sees the forest. Jung knew better. Most of the psyche exists beyond the light, and what exists beyond the light still affects where you walk. This is why changing your circumstances does not always change your life, because wherever you go, you bring the unconscious with you. You can leave the relationship, but bring the same attachment pattern into the next one. You can leave the job, but bring the same fear of visibility into the next opportunity. You can abandon one goal, but bring the same belief of unworthiness into another dream. You can move thousands of miles away and still arrive carrying the same psychological architecture. The prison was never entirely the place. Part of it was the pattern, and patterns are extraordinarily difficult to recognize. Because after enough repetition, they stop feeling like patterns. They begin feeling like personality. This is just who I am. I'm always like this. I've never been good at that. People always leave me. Nothing ever works out. I always choose the wrong person. Life has always been difficult for me. Listen carefully to the language. Always, never, everyone, no one. These words often reveal something important. A temporary experience has become an identity, and once an experience becomes identity, the mind begins unconsciously protecting it, even when that identity causes suffering, because the psyche often prefers what is familiar to what is unknown. Familiar pain can feel safer than unfamiliar freedom. That is one of the strangest paradoxes of human psychology. People do not always resist change because the old life is good. Sometimes they resist because the old life is known. Imagine spending 20 years inside a dark room. One day, someone opens the door. Sunlight enters. You would imagine the person immediately runs outside, but perhaps they don't. Perhaps the light hurts their eyes. Perhaps the open landscape feels overwhelming. Perhaps the room, despite being small, feels predictable. The darkness has become familiar. Freedom has not. This is what happens psychologically when an old pattern begins breaking. The conscious mind says, "This is what I've always wanted." But another part whispers, "This is not who we know how to be." And suddenly, you hesitate. But this hesitation is precisely where consciousness can change the game. Because you cannot interrupt a pattern. While believing it is destiny, you cannot leave a psychological maze. While insisting there is no maze, you cannot change a script. While believing you are merely watching reality unfold. The first transformation is recognition. The moment when something that happened 10 times finally becomes visible as one repeating structure. Different faces, different places, different years, same emotional architecture. And when you finally see it, something inside you becomes quiet, because perhaps for the first time, you realize your life was never asking you to become better at surviving the pattern. It was asking you to stop repeating it. And that is where the real reset begins. Not in the brain, not overnight, not through some magical technique, but in the moment consciousness finally sees what the unconscious has been repeating all along. There are patterns so old you cannot remember when they began. Perhaps you were the responsible one, the quiet one, the difficult one, the strong one, the invisible one, the child who learned not to need too much, the child who learned achievement created attention, the child who discovered that peace depended on keeping everyone else happy. No one may have explicitly taught you these rules. That is what makes them so powerful. You discovered them, and once they worked, the psyche remembered. A child who learns that silence prevents conflict may become an adult who cannot express anger. A child who learns that achievement earns affection may become an adult incapable of resting without guilt. A child who learns that vulnerability invites pain may become an adult who desperately wants intimacy while unconsciously destroying it whenever it gets too close. The adult believes they are making choices. The old pattern believes it is keeping them alive. And this is where Jung's psychology becomes extraordinarily useful, because he did not see the unconscious simply as a warehouse of forgotten memories. He saw it as active, creative, compensatory, constantly attempting to restore balance to the personality. What consciousness excludes, the unconscious preserves. What the ego refuses, the shadow carries. The pattern remains hidden until one day the same story happens again, and something inside you finally asks, "Why does this keep happening?" That question may be the beginning of an entirely different life. There's a strange contradiction hidden inside human behavior. We say we want change, yet when change finally arrives, something inside us often pulls backward. You decide to become more confident. Then suddenly, you begin questioning yourself more than ever. You decide to leave an unhealthy relationship. Then, the moment distance appears, you begin remembering only the good moments. You finally receive the opportunity you spent years waiting for. And instead of excitement, you feel fear. You tell yourself, "I'm not ready. Maybe this isn't the right time. Perhaps I should wait." From the outside, this looks irrational, but from the perspective of the unconscious, it can make perfect sense. Because the psyche does not automatically interpret the unfamiliar as better. Sometimes, it interprets the unfamiliar as dangerous. Imagine living your entire life inside a small village surrounded by enormous walls. You know every street, every house, every sound. Life inside the walls is limited, perhaps even painful, but predictable. Then one morning, a gate opens. Beyond it, an entire world appears. Mountains, oceans, cities, possibilities you never imagined. The conscious mind sees freedom, but another part of you sees uncertainty. Inside the village, you knew how to survive. Outside, you do not know who you will become. This is one reason transformation can feel frightening even when it is exactly what you consciously desire. You are not simply changing behavior. You are threatening an identity. And identity has enormous psychological weight. For years, perhaps decades, you have accumulated evidence about who you believe yourself to be. Every experience becomes another piece. Every rejection, every success, every failure, every relationship, every decision. Eventually, these pieces form a psychological portrait. This is me. But what happens when life begins contradicting that portrait? Suppose someone has secretly believed, I am the person nobody chooses. Then one day, someone genuinely chooses them. You might imagine the old belief disappears. Often, it does not. Instead, the new experience creates tension. Part of the psyche says, this is what I've always wanted. Another part says, this does not match who I believe I am. And whenever reality conflicts with identity, something has to change. Either the identity expands, or the experience is unconsciously pushed away. This is where self-sabotage often begins, not as hatred of oneself, but as loyalty to an old psychological structure. You may create distance, become suspicious, search for flaws, interpret ordinary uncertainty as proof that something is wrong. Eventually, the relationship collapses, and the old identity whispers, see, I knew nobody would stay. The painful belief survives, and because it survives, the psyche returns to familiar territory. This mechanism appears everywhere. Someone believes, money never stays with me. When financial stability begins emerging, their behavior becomes strangely impulsive. Someone believes, I am always overlooked. When recognition arrives, they minimize their accomplishments, avoid visibility, or retreat. Someone believes, life is a struggle. When life becomes peaceful, they unconsciously create another problem. Not because they consciously want suffering, because the nervous system of the personality has learned to recognize struggle as normal. Peace feels foreign, and what feels foreign can initially feel unsafe. Jung understood that the ego builds continuity. It needs a story, but eventually you arrive at the same crossroads with a new awareness. On the 11th visit, something changes. You recognize the tree, the road, the old sign. You suddenly realize, I've been here before. Nothing external has changed, but consciousness has entered the scene. For the first time, turning left is no longer automatic. You can stop, look around, perhaps turn right. This is how psychological repetition begins breaking. Not through dramatic declarations, not through promising yourself, never again, but through recognizing the exact moment when the old pattern asks you to become the old person again, and choosing, even imperfectly, not to obey. There are moments when a thought appears inside your mind, and you never question who is speaking. You'll fail. They don't really care about you. Don't say anything. You're embarrassing yourself. Leave before they leave you. Prove them wrong. Don't trust anyone. The voice sounds like you. It uses your vocabulary. It lives inside your mind, so naturally. You assume it represents your deepest truth. But Jung's psychology offers a disturbing possibility. Not every voice inside your mind represents the whole of you. Sometimes, a complex speaks with your voice. Remember, a complex is an emotionally charged psychological structure. It contains memories, expectations, images, associations, old emotional conclusions, and when something activates it, the complex can temporarily organize your entire perception. Imagine a large building with hundreds of rooms. Normally, you move freely between them, but one room contains an alarm system. The moment someone touches the door, every light in the building turns red, sirens begin, doors lock. Suddenly, the entire building behaves as if one room were the whole structure. That is what happens when a powerful complex becomes activated. A single event touches an old wound, and suddenly your entire psychological world reorganizes around it. A message goes unanswered. The abandonment complex awakens. Someone disagrees with you. The inferiority complex awakens. A colleague succeeds. The comparison wound awakens. Someone becomes emotionally close. The fear of vulnerability awakens. And once activated, the complex does not simply create emotion. It creates interpretation. You begin seeing evidence everywhere. A delayed response becomes rejection. A neutral expression becomes judgment. Someone else's success becomes proof of your failure. A moment of distance becomes evidence that love is disappearing. The complex searches reality and finds what it expects. This is one of the most dangerous characteristics of unconscious repetition. It can make the past appear to be happening in the present. Imagine hearing footsteps behind you in a dark street. Years ago, you were attacked. Now, your body responds before your conscious mind has evaluated anything. Heart racing, muscles tightening, attention narrowing. The reaction is understandable. The past taught the organism to prepare. Psychological complexes can operate similarly, even when the threat is emotional rather than physical. An old experience becomes a template. Then, whenever something resembles that template, the entire old emotional system activates. This is why someone can know intellectually. My partner is not my father. My boss is not my mother. This relationship is not my previous relationship. This opportunity is not my previous failure. And still, react as though they were. The conscious mind knows the difference. The complex does not always care. It recognizes emotional similarity, not objective reality. And this is where your life can begin repeating without your permission. Because every time the complex interprets the present through the past, it encourages behaviors that recreate familiar outcomes. You become defensive, so the other person withdraws. Their withdrawal confirms your fear of abandonment. You become controlling, so the other person seeks distance. Their distance confirms your belief that people cannot be trusted. You hide your ideas, so nobody recognizes your potential. Their lack of recognition confirms your belief that you are invisible. Yet once the complex becomes visible, a new possibility appears. The old feeling can arise. Without requiring the old behavior, fear can appear, and you can stay. Insecurity can appear, and you can speak. Uncertainty can appear, and you can continue. The desire to run can appear, and you can wait. The urge to repeat the pattern can appear, without becoming your next decision. And perhaps, that is one of the most important discoveries you can ever make. Healing does not always mean the old voice becomes silent. Sometimes, healing means it speaks and you no longer mistake it for you. There is a moment, so small, so ordinary, that most people miss it completely. It happens before the argument, before the withdrawal, before the impulsive decision, before you send the message you later regret, before you abandon the opportunity, before you return to the person you promised yourself you would leave behind, Before the pattern becomes visible in the outside world, something happens inside. A sensation, a thought, a tightening in the body, a familiar emotional shift. Perhaps your chest becomes heavy. Perhaps your stomach tightens. Perhaps your mind suddenly begins creating explanations. Perhaps you feel an overwhelming need to act immediately. Something has been activated. And this moment, before behavior begins, may be one of the most important moments of your life, because this is where unconscious repetition can become conscious choice. Most people notice patterns only after they have completed themselves, after the relationship collapses, after the opportunity disappears, after the conflict explodes, after the damage is done. Then they look backward and say, "I did it again." But transformation begins when recognition moves earlier, instead of recognizing the pattern afterward. You begin recognizing it while it is happening. Eventually, you recognize it before it happens. Imagine watching the same storm arrive every year. At first, you notice only when rain begins falling. Later, you recognize the dark clouds. Eventually, you learn to notice the subtle change in the wind, long before the first drop appears. Psychological awareness develops in much the same way. At first, you recognize consequences, then behaviors, then emotions, then triggers. Eventually, you begin recognizing the almost invisible movement inside the psyche that precedes everything else. And once you can see that movement, you are no longer completely inside it. This is where the observer becomes essential. Jung's work repeatedly emphasized the importance of bringing unconscious contents into relationship with consciousness, not suppressing them, not pretending they do not exist, seeing them, because observation introduces distance, and distance introduces possibility. Imagine standing on a railway platform for your entire life. Every time a certain train arrived, you automatically boarded it. You never checked the destination. You simply recognized the train. The doors opened. You entered. And hours later, you found yourself arriving at the same place, again and again. One day, the train arrives. The doors open. You feel the familiar urge to step inside. But this time, you stop. You look at the train. For the first time, you read the destination. And suddenly, you understand. This train has always taken you somewhere you no longer want to go. Nothing prevents you from boarding. The doors remain open. The old impulse remains. But now, there is awareness. And awareness asks, do you actually want to go there again? This is the psychological moment in which a life can change. Not when temptation disappears, not when fear disappears, not when the old pattern becomes impossible, but when repetition becomes visible before obedience. Perhaps someone does not answer your message immediately. The old abandonment complex awakens. Your mind begins racing. They're losing interest. I knew this would happen. Something is wrong. The old version of you would react, send another message, then another, demand reassurance, become cold, withdraw first, create a conflict, anything to escape the uncertainty. But now, something different happens. You notice. There it is, the old feeling, the familiar story, the same emotional doorway, and instead of walking through it, you wait. Not because the emotion is wrong, because you finally understand that emotion is not instruction. Fear can speak. Without becoming your decision, this sounds simple. It is not. For someone who has lived inside a pattern for decades, not reacting can feel almost unbearable. The psyche expects completion. The old sequence wants its ending. Trigger, emotion, reaction, consequence, confirmation, again. But when you interrupt the sequence, something extraordinary happens. The trigger still appears, Life naturally continues presenting situations that activate existing psychological structures. And now, you have another opportunity not to become perfect, to become conscious. Again, the trigger appears. You notice. The emotion rises. You pause. You choose. Again, again, until one day, something remarkable happens. The situation that once controlled your entire emotional world appears again. But this time, the reaction is smaller, quieter. You recognize the old doorway, yet no longer feel compelled to enter. And perhaps you smile because you suddenly understand. The pattern did not disappear because you fought it. It disappeared because you stopped feeding it with the same response. But there is another reason patterns repeat, and this one is more difficult to see. Sometimes, the life you keep repeating is not protecting you from pain. It is protecting you from becoming someone your current identity cannot accept. Carl Jung called the rejected side of personality the shadow. Most people hear the word shadow and imagine something dark. Aggression, jealousy, cruelty, desire, fear, and yes, the shadow can contain qualities we are uncomfortable admitting, but Jung's idea was far more complex. The shadow also contains life, strength you were taught to suppress, ambition you learned to hide, creativity that once embarrassed you, assertiveness that made others uncomfortable, desire that contradicted expectations, confidence you were punished for expressing, even joy, can become shadow. Anything the conscious personality refuses to identify with can be pushed outside the image you call me. Imagine growing up in an environment where being quiet is rewarded. You become the good child, polite, easy, never demanding. Everyone praises you, so the identity becomes stronger. I am agreeable. I don't cause problems. I always understand. But what happened to anger? What happened to boundaries? What happened to the part capable of saying no? It did not disappear. It entered the shadow. Years later, you become an adult who repeatedly finds yourself surrounded by people who take too much. You give. They take. You understand. They demand. You remain patient. They cross another boundary. Eventually, you feel resentful. And you ask, why do I always attract people like this? Jung might ask another question. What quality are these people expressing that you have forbidden yourself from expressing? Perhaps not selfishness. Perhaps self-protection. Perhaps the ability to prioritize yourself. Perhaps the capacity to disappoint someone without collapsing under guilt. The repetition is suddenly revealing something. Life keeps placing boundary crossers in front of you, and every encounter exposes the same missing psychological function, the ability to say, enough. This is where repetition becomes a messenger. The pattern is not simply showing you what is wrong with other people. It may be showing you what remains undeveloped within yourself. Consider someone who repeatedly becomes fascinated by extraordinarily confident people. They admire them, follow them, idealize them, sometimes even become dependent upon them. Why? Perhaps because confidence lives in their own shadow. They see outside themselves what they cannot yet claim within themselves. Projection creates fascination. The other person seems to possess something magical, something you lack. But sometimes, what appears magical in another person is simply an unlived part of yourself. This is why reclaiming projection can release enormous psychic energy. Instead of asking, how can I become like them? You begin asking, what quality am I recognizing in them that my own personality is asking me to develop? Courage, discipline, freedom, creativity? Whatever the missing quality may be, it eventually has to be lived. You may need to disappoint someone, admit what you want, refuse what you do not want, and in that moment, the shadow gives something back. Energy, a part of your personality that once required repression. becomes available for life. This is why integration often produces an unexpected sense of vitality. You are no longer spending so much energy maintaining the old identity. The person you were trying to protect begins expanding. And suddenly, the pattern that followed you for years has less reason to return because perhaps it was never asking you only to escape something. Perhaps it was asking you to become capable of something. There comes a point in transformation when understanding the past is no longer enough. You know the pattern. You recognize the complex. You have seen the shadow. You understand why certain situations activate you. And still, a question remains. Who are you without the repetition? This question is more important than it appears, because many people spend so much of their lives trying to escape an old identity. They never consciously participate in forming the next one. They know what they do not want. I don't want toxic relationships anymore. I don't want to be afraid. I don't want to keep procrastinating. I don't want to live for other people's approval. Good. But removal creates space, and eventually, space asks to be inhabited. Imagine demolishing an old house. The walls come down, the roof disappears. Everything that once trapped you is gone. You stand on empty land, celebrating freedom. But if you never build anything new, eventually, you may begin missing the old walls. Not because they were good, because at least they gave structure. This is why people sometimes return to patterns they already understand. The old identity still offers structure. The new identity remains undefined. Transformation therefore requires more than rejection. It requires orientation. Jung called the lifelong movement towards psychological wholeness. Individuation, not becoming perfect, not becoming superior, not becoming permanently happy, becoming increasingly capable of living from the totality of the psyche, rather than from a narrow unconscious script. This process changes the central question. Instead of asking, "How do I stop being who I was?" you begin asking, "What is trying to emerge through me now?" That question faces forward, and the unconscious responds differently when consciousness begins participating in its own development. Dreams change, interests change. Your relationship with the past changes too. The memory remains. The wound may still ache occasionally. The old voice may still appear, but it no longer possesses absolute authority. You have become larger than it, and that is what makes a new life possible. Not forgetting the old one, becoming conscious enough that the old one no longer has to repeat itself. There is a stage of transformation that almost nobody warns you about. You begin changing. The pattern becomes visible. You stop reacting the way you once did. You establish boundaries. You become more conscious of what you tolerate. You stop chasing, stop proving, stop explaining. And for a moment, you believe the hardest part is over. Then something unexpected happens. The old life calls you back. An old relationship reappears, an old temptation returns. A familiar conflict suddenly emerges. Someone presses exactly the button you thought no longer existed. The same emotional atmosphere returns, almost as if nothing had changed. And immediately, you wonder, am I back where I started? No, not necessarily, because there is an enormous difference between encountering the same situation and being the same person inside it. This distinction matters. Imagine climbing a spiral staircase. You continue moving upward, but every complete turn brings you back to the same side of the building. You look through the window and see a familiar landscape. For a moment, you think you've been walking in circles, but look carefully. The view is similar, yet you are standing on a higher floor. Psychological development often works like this. Themes return: abandonment, approval, control, visibility, rejection, intimacy, worth. They return because these are not simple problems to solve once. They are deep psychological themes that may accompany us through different stages of life. But each time, you have the opportunity to meet them from another level of consciousness. The first time, you reacted automatically. The second time, you understood afterward. The third time, you noticed while it was happening. Eventually, you recognize the pattern before it takes control. The situation may look similar. You are not. And that is progress. One of the great dangers during transformation is expecting never to feel old emotions again. You assume healing means never feeling jealous, never feeling insecure, never feeling afraid, never wanting approval, never being triggered. But that expectation can create another prison, because the moment an old emotion returns, you interpret it as failure. I thought I had healed this. I thought I was past this. I must be going backward. Then shame appears. And now, you are not only experiencing the original emotion, you are judging yourself for experiencing it. The pattern gains energy again. But individuation is not emotional perfection. It is increasing relationship with the total psyche. Fear can return without becoming your master. Anger can return without becoming destruction. Insecurity can return without determining your worth. Grief can return without convincing you that life has stopped. The goal is not to become psychologically sterile. The goal is to become psychologically conscious. Imagine the ocean. A mature sailor does not demand that waves disappear. They learn how to navigate them. Some days, the sea is calm. Other days, storms arrive. The sailor's power does not come from controlling the ocean. It comes from knowing the vessel. Your psyche is that vessel. The more conscious you become, the less every emotional storm feels like the end of the world. You recognize weather. This is fear. This is projection. This is an old complex. This is the desire to be chosen. This is my need to control uncertainty. Naming does not make the emotion disappear, but it changes your relationship to it. And when the old life calls you back, the essential question becomes, who am I now in the presence of what once controlled me? That is the real measure. Perhaps the person who once made you desperate returns, and you feel something, but you no longer abandon yourself. Perhaps criticism arrives, and it hurts, but you no longer collapse. Perhaps an opportunity frightens you, and you still move toward it. Perhaps someone misunderstands you, and for the first time, you do not spend 3 hours constructing an explanation. The old trigger, a new response, that is transformation, quiet, almost invisible, but profound. And every time this happens, the psyche receives another piece of evidence. We are no longer living by the old script. There is a question people ask themselves for years. Why am I like this? At first, it sounds like self-awareness. Sometimes, it is. Understanding origins can be extraordinarily important. Why do I fear abandonment? Why do I avoid conflict? Why do I need control? Why do I become attached to unavailable people? Why do I disappear whenever something matters? These questions can open doors, but eventually, a question that once liberated you can become another room you refuse to leave, because there is a difference between understanding the past and endlessly living inside its explanation. At some point, why am I like this? Must become, what am I going to do when this part of me appears? That is a very different question. The first looks backward, the second introduces responsibility into the present. Not blame, responsibility, the ability to respond. Imagine discovering that a river was diverted decades ago. You investigate, find the original obstruction, understand exactly how it happened. this knowledge matters. But if you want the water to flow somewhere new, eventually you must change the channel. Understanding why the river changed direction does not automatically redirect it. The psyche is similar. Insight illuminates, action reorganizes. This is where many people become trapped in self-analysis. They learn the language of psychology. They identify every wound, every attachment style, every childhood pattern, every trigger, every defense mechanism. They can explain themselves beautifully, but explanation becomes identity. I do this because of my childhood. I am this way because I was rejected. I cannot trust because someone betrayed me. The explanation may be accurate, but accuracy does not always equal freedom. A map can show you exactly where you are and still not move your feet. Jung's psychology was never merely about endlessly analyzing what went wrong. Individuation points toward development, toward becoming, toward a more complete relationship with yourself. Eventually, the question changes. Not, what happened to me? But, what does life require from me now? That question contains movement. Suppose you understand that your fear of speaking came from years of criticism. Good. Now, what does life require? Perhaps speaking, not perfectly, not fearlessly, but speaking. Suppose you understand why you constantly seek approval. What does life require now? The past can explain the pattern, but only the present can interrupt it. Yesterday says, when someone withdraws, we chase. Today says, maybe not. Yesterday says, when we are criticized, we disappear. Today says, maybe not. That phrase contains enormous power, maybe not. It creates a crack in inevitability, and through that crack, choice enters, one day. If you continue this work long enough, you notice something strange. A situation happens that once would have destroyed your peace, and it doesn't. You notice it, you feel it. Perhaps there is still discomfort, but hours later, you realize you did not become the old version of yourself. No dramatic breakthrough announced itself, no voice from the sky, no sudden feeling that everything had changed. You simply responded differently, and life continued. These moments are easy to underestimate, but psychologically, they are enormous, because for perhaps the first time, the past failed to predict your response. Imagine a machine designed to produce the same result every time. Input A enters, response B appears. For years, the sequence is perfect. Then one day, input A enters, and something else happens. The machine has changed. Your psychological patterns operate through similar predictability. Criticism enters. Defensiveness appears. Distance enters. Pursuit appears. Opportunity enters. Self-doubt appears. Conflict enters. Silence appears. But consciousness introduces variation. Criticism enters, and curiosity appears. Distance enters, and patience appears. Opportunity enters, and courage appears beside fear. Conflict enters, and a boundary appears. This is the moment the future begins separating from the past, because the future is not created only by what happens to you. It is also created by the patterns through which you respond. Change the pattern. And even familiar circumstances can begin producing unfamiliar outcomes. The person who once attracted chaos may begin recognizing chaos before entering it. The person who once tolerated disrespect may leave earlier. The person who once abandoned every dream at the first sign of difficulty may continue. The person who once needed everyone to understand them may finally allow misunderstanding. And because their behavior changes, the environment begins changing too. Relationships reorganize. Some people move closer, others disappear. Opportunities once invisible become visible. Not because reality magically obeys the mind, but because perception, choice, behavior. Over time, the old identity begins to feel strangely distant. You remember the person, you understand them, you may even love them, but you no longer recognize their limitations as your destiny. The past becomes history instead of prophecy, and that may be one of the deepest forms of freedom available to a human being. Not having a perfect past, not erasing memory, not becoming immune to pain, but reaching the point where what happened before no longer automatically determines what you choose next. Perhaps you began this journey believing transformation meant becoming someone completely different, a reset, a clean beginning, a new mind, a new identity, a life untouched by everything that came before. But Jung's psychology points towards something deeper. You do not become whole by erasing your history. You become whole by no longer being unconsciously controlled by it. The child remains part of you. The wounds remain part of your story. The failures remain. The relationships, the mistakes, the things you wish you had done differently. None of them need to disappear, because freedom does not require amnesia. It requires consciousness. Imagine standing inside an enormous archive containing every chapter of your life. Thousands of pages, some beautiful, some painful, some you have spent years trying not to read for most of your life. Those pages were writing the future without your awareness. An old sentence became a belief became a pattern became a choice became a consequence, and the consequence became more evidence for the original sentence. Again, until repetition looked like destiny. But then, you became conscious. You opened the archive. You read the pages. And for the first time, you realized, these are chapters. They are not commands. Your past can explain you without imprisoning you. Your wounds can influence you without defining you. Your fear can speak without deciding. Your shadow can exist without secretly controlling the room. Your complexes can awaken without taking the steering wheel. And the moment you understand this, something fundamental changes. You stop asking life to remove every trigger. You stop waiting to feel completely ready. You stop believing transformation will arrive on the day fear disappears. Instead, you begin living differently, while the old voices are still learning that they are no longer in control. At first, they speak loudly. Then something quieter becomes possible. You do not need to know exactly who you will become. You only need enough consciousness to recognize who you no longer need to be. Then take the next step, and another, until one day, you turn around and discover that the life you thought you were condemned to repeat ended quietly. The moment you stopped confusing your unconscious patterns with your destiny.